Hi and welcome to this DCP Web Blender 2.8 Eevee Smoke Simulation Beginners tutorial. So, the first thing we need to do is download a font. I'm going to use the same font I used in previous tutorials. So, we'll go to this website. You can pick any font you like. I'm going to pick this particular font here. This one, which is what I used in my previous tutorial. I'll suggest you use something that's quite thick, like this sort of style of font. This one here or here, and you can scrub through these fonts and find one you like. I'm going to use this one here, so I'm going to click the download button, and I'm just going to drag and drop that font into this folder, and I can close down the browser. Let's delete this folder for a minute. We'll right click here and extract this font. We can delete the zip file, and we'll rename this file to font, or the folder itself, so we know what it is. And inside here we can delete these ones, and we don't really need this italic version, so we can get rid of that. We've got the one font left. So let's open up Blender, and we'll go to File, Save As, and on my desktop go into this same folder, and we'll call it Smoke Text-01, and then we'll save it. So the cube, we want to delete it first, so we'll delete the cube, and let's just press Ctrl S to save. We're going to press Shift A, and we're going to insert a plane. So we've got this little square here, and we want to scale up this square. We want to make it our floor, so we want to make it bigger. So we press the letter S on our keyboard, and that will allow us to scale. And then we type in 10, 1, 0, and that will scale it up. And now we've got a floor. And we want to extrude from this edge here, so we're going to go from object mode, we're going to go to edit mode. So if you want to switch between these two modes, you can just press the tab key on your keyboard, or you can select it from here. I prefer to just select the object and press the tab key on my keyboard. So I'll press tab, and then I want to do an edge select, so I'll click this edge select tool, and I'll select this edge. I'm going to use my mouse wheel to zoom out a little bit. You can hold down the shift key and the middle mouse button just to pan around a little bit. You can see we want to just see the whole edge here. Then we're going to press the letter E on our keyboard to extrude, and then we want to extrude on the Z axis, and then we're going to type in 10 again, and that will make a wall in the background like this. Okay, and we just want to curve this edge a little bit, so we'll click here on this same edge, and then we're going to press Ctrl B, move our mouse wheel to about here, press Ctrl B, and then drag up. And then when we get something like this, we'll use our mouse wheel to create some segments. So you roll the mouse wheel upwards, and then we'll click here to confirm. We'll press the tab key on our keyboard again, or you can go edit object mode, and that will move you back into object mode. And we've got a little stage here now, and then we can go to object, and we'll select shade smooth. That makes it smooth. Let's go to file, save. We'll press number 7 on our keyboard. Number 7 takes us into the top view, and we want to, let's see, we want to add some text, so we're going to press Shift A and add some text. Here's our text. Let's zoom in a little bit, and we'll press the tab key to go into edit mode. We can delete this text. I'm going to type in my DCP Web company name. You can type in anything you like. Once you've typed it in, hit the tab key again, and you'll come back into object mode. Go to file, save. Let's save this. And we want to change the font, so we're going to go to the object data here, and we will click on the font here, and then the open folder, and then we'll go into the font folder and select this font. We'll click open. Now the font has changed, and we'll set the size to 2. And the font's a little bit off the screen, it doesn't matter. So what we'll do is we'll go to object, set origin, geometry to origin, and that will center it off on this cursor here. Now we want to just middle mouse click and then pan around to around this sort of angle, and we'll click the move tool, and we'll drag our text up a little bit, and then we want to press R to rotate and then we're going to press X to rotate on the X axis, and we're going to type in 90, and that will make our text like this on this sort of angle. We want it flat, right, like this, but standing upwards. And then we want to bevel this and set some thickness to it. So we'll go to geometry and we want to extrude, and we'll set this to 0.1, and that will give it a bit of thickness here. And then we want to set the bevel to 1 and the resolution to 1. We don't want to do that. What we want to do is set it to 0.1 and set the resolution to 0.1. Let's see, that's still not right. We want to set it to 0.01 and set the resolution to 1. We don't want the bevel to be so thick, but we want to see like a beveled edge here. You can increase the bevel a little bit more if you want. Maybe that should be fine. So you can see it's got this rounded edge, and that will help with light reflections later. So maybe we'll leave it like this. Let's just check. Should be okay. Right. So let's press number 7 on our keyboard, and that takes us to the top view. We'll hold down the Shift and the Control key just to move the screen a little bit, or move this move the camera, the perspective view. So we're in top orthographic because we press number 7, and we want to duplicate this logo 3 times. Well, let's duplicate it. Yeah, we'll duplicate it 3 times. So if we go to collections here, and we click on the arrow to drop down, and we see the objects that we have in our scene at the moment. Let's go to File, Save, and we're going to click on the text here, and then we're going to press Control and D. Let's click on the object. I think it's Shift D, isn't it? Shift. It's Shift D, not Control D. Shift D. And Shift D will make a duplicate copy. So we've got this copy here, and then we're going to press Shift D one more time. So let's click on this text here, Shift D. So now we've got 3 copies of this text. We'll click on this middle one here. Doesn't really matter, but we'll click on the middle one, and we'll drag it out to be in the center. And we'll click on the bottom one, and we'll drag that out to be the behind it. So we've got 3 stacked like this. We're going to change the settings slightly in a minute. So let's click on the top one, and this top one, let's just call this text front. So this is the front of the text. The middle one will be, let's see, will be this one here, and this one we're going to call it text smoke, and then this one here at the back is going to be text light. So we've got these 3, and it's worth naming them. Let's just call the plane floor, or let's call it stage, a better word. And if we name these things, when we come to look in the collection here, we'll know what they are. So we know automatically this is the front, this is the light at the back, and this will be the smoke. Okay, so with the smoke selected, we want to set the extrude to 0.01 here, and then we want to select the light source at the back here, and also set that one, let's see, lights here, and we want to set that to 0.01, and we want to bring these closer together. So we'll click on the move tool. We already have that selected. Let's select the smoke first. We'll zoom in with our mouse wheel. I'm going to drag it and have it sitting quite close to the front text here. And we'll click the light one, text, and have that sitting quite close as well, something like this. We'll make a little sandwich of text, think of it that way. Then let's zoom out a little bit with our mouse wheel, and then we'll middle mouse click, and we can pan around to the side. Let's pan around to the other side here. Something like this. And we're going to click on this render view here, so we can see the text being rendered. Let's press number 7 on our keyboard. So we go to the top view, we'll click on this light source here, and we're just going to drag it so that it's sitting in front of our text here. Somewhere around here is fine, like here. and then when we pan around we'll see the front of the text and it's a bit clearer. Let's go to File, Save, and what we need to do, let's think about this a little bit. It should be fine. Let's just do it this way for now. So we're going to click on the front text. So let's click front text here, and we're going to go to the material, and we'll click new material, and then we're going to pretty much leave all the settings as they are, but we're going to change the base color, and you can pick whatever color you want. Maybe I'll go for like a sort of blue color, something like this sort of shade. And then we're going to click on the light text here. We'll go new, and this time we're going to select from the surface, we'll select emission. So we'll make it emission surface, and we're going to select like a light blue color, something like turquoise. And that's what we need to do with our colors at the moment. Let's just see what's going on here. Yep, that's fine. And then we're going to go File, Save, and we'll click on the smoke text here. And with the smoke text selected, we need to go to Object, Convert to a Mesh. So now the text in the middle that's sitting in between these two layers is a mesh object, and the ones outside are font objects. So this mesh object in the middle, we can edit it, but we can't change the characters in there very easily now. So you need to make sure that this is all set up correctly the way you want it to be before you do that particular step. But this should be fine. So we'll go File, Save, and we want to make sure the smoke object is selected here, this text, and go to Object, and we'll go to Quick Effects and Smoke. And what happens here is Blender, if we go back to this view here, the solid view, and if we click play, we'll see the smoke being emitted from that middle object, the center one, yeah? And our text light in the back and the text in the front will be in between. And Blender's created this orange box, and this orange box is called the domain, and the domain will be where the smoke is generated. So if we pause this and go back to the first frame and press number 7 on our keyboard, we're going to go into the top view and zoom out a little bit. And we want to increase the size of this domain. But before we do that, we want to select all 3 of these objects. So the way to select all 3 of them is to hold down the shift key. So if I click on the camera, for example, I'll click on this first text here, this one here, then I'll hold down the shift key on my keyboard and select all 3 like this. I'll move my mouse cursor back here, and I'll press Ctrl P, and I want to parent the objects. So I'm going to click Object here. And what this does is, if we click on the front text and drag it, it will move by itself. If we click on the light text and move it, that will move by itself. But if we click on the smoke text and move it, it will move all 3 objects, because the smoke has become the parent. So whatever we do to the smoke text in terms of rotation and changing its position, that will affect all 3 of them. So you can think of the smoke text as like the master object, and whatever we do to that text in terms of movement or positioning, then that will, or even rotation, that will affect the other 2 texts as well. So we can animate this one smoke text in terms of its position, and that will affect the other 2 layers as well, the text front and the light. So if we click on the domain, let's select the domain here. We want to make this domain bigger, so we want to scale it on the y-axis. So we're going to press S, and then, in fact, before we do that, the wise thing for us to do, we know the domain is wide enough, but let's make it a bit wider. So we want to scale it on the x-axis, yeah, the x-axis. So we're going to press S and then X and make the domain a little bit wider. something like this. Then we want to click on the smoke text here and go to object, and we want to rotate it on the Z axis 90 degrees. So Z rotation, it should be this one, 90 degrees, and that will rotate it this way around. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to go to the smoke domain, and then we want to increase the size of this on its height. So we want to do the Y axis, right, in this direction. So we press S and then Y, and then we want to scale it. Oops, let's undo that. Let's do S then Y, and we want to scale it so that our text will fit inside when we rotate it. So we've got this smoke domain box, which is much bigger now, and if we were to click on the smoke text, when we rotate it, it will generate smoke within the realms of this box, right? So if we set the Z-axis back to 0, that will set our text back to the front here. So it'll be at the front again. And I think it will be wise for us. Let's just see, this smoke domain is sitting underneath the floor. Can you see? So if we press number 1 on our keyboard, we'll come to the front orthographic, and we can see the domain is sitting below. We want to make this domain a bit taller anyway, so let's click on the smoke domain, and we want to scale it on the Z axis. So we'll press S and then Z, and we'll make it a bit bigger, something like this, not too much bigger. And then we want to move the smoke domain upwards, in the upwards direction. So we can press G to grab it, and then press Z to move it on the Z axis. So G will grab the object, and then Z will allow us to move it up, and we want it just above the plane here. So you can see it's sitting just above here. And then we can rotate back around, and we see our text in here and the domain here. Let's go to File, Save. And in this particular view, if we press play, we can see the smoke being generated. We can zoom in a little bit and put it at sort of an angle. Then if we were to click on the smoke text here and then start rotating it, you can see what's going to happen with the smoke, right? The smoke will rotate around, and the reason we can do this is because we've made the domain bigger, so that the text, when we rotate it on this Z axis, it will fit the domain, right? The text will, or the domain will fit this text like this. So let's set the Z axis back to 0, and we'll pan around here. Let's just rotate around to the front, and we'll pause it. We can pause it on this frame here, for example, frame 68 or frame 70. We can see smoke at the moment, right? And if we go to our 3D viewport, or the 3D render, Eevee render here, we'll see that we don't see any smoke. So when we go back to the first frame and play it, we just don't see smoke. So to fix that, we're going to click on the smoke domain here, and then we're going to go to material. And in material, use node is already selected, and in the surface we want to select principal volume here. And then in the volume setting, we want to make sure principal volume is selected here as well as default. Then we want to go to our render settings here, and then select volumetrics here. Now we can see the smoke. So if we play, we'll start to see the smoke being generated. It's not looking like great smoke at the moment, but we're going to fix that. So let's go to File, Save, and what we'll do, let's have a little look here. So I think the first thing we can do is sort out this the world background. So let's just make that black. So if we click on the world here, we won't make it black at the minute, we'll make it quite a dark color. just like a dark grey. We'll just get rid of this dark grey, make it dark grey. Then we'll click on the plane, this stage here, and we'll go to material. We need to stop this, I think. Let's go back. So we'll click on the stage here, stop it from playing. And then in the stage, we'll click on, let's click stage here. We'll go to material here, click new. And then we're going to set the base color to black. And the specular, we're going to turn that off for now. And if we click play, we'll be able to see the smoke much clearer now, yeah? But it's still not looking amazing, so we're going to fix that. So the first thing we'll do is go to the smoke domain here, click it, and then click on the physics here, and set the resolution to 60 for now. And that will improve the smoke a little bit. And we're going to set the temperature difference to... We need to play around with these settings, right? And this is where you can start experimenting. So if we zoom in a little bit, let's just get it. Let's just grab it here, something like this. This is where we need to start playing around with the settings to see what the smoke's going to look like in the end, right? We need to play around with this. So let's set the dissolve first, because that's going to help us, right? So we click dissolve, and inside dissolve it's set to 5. This is how much time it takes for the smoke to dissolve. If you turn it off, then it's just going to keep pumping out smoke like this, and it's going to look a bit blocky and it ain't going to look great. Because we want our smoke to dissolve as it's getting closer to the top here, right? So you can play around with these settings. You can have it quite low, then it's, you know, as you animate this, it will be quite small. We want it to be a bit bigger, so we're going to leave it around 5. And then let's try and set this to something like 0.2. And then we'll set the velocity to 0.4. And what you'll notice, if we pause this quickly and go back to the first frame, let's go to file save. Let's set our time frame to around 120 for now, because when we're playing this, we can get it to loop a lot quicker. You can even make it a shorter amount. But every time we change settings here, it needs to loop back really to see the effect of those settings. So if we were to change something in here, we may need to wait for it to loop all the way back. Let's increase the density to around 0.04. So we can see our smoke being generated now. And what we'll do, let's set it to, let's try a high resolution. This might cause some, this will slow down Blender, yeah? When you set up the high resolution, because it's creating much more clearer smoke, but it's just going to take longer to render out. So we need to let this play through. We could cache it, but we'll do that in a moment. So once it's played through once, you can see the smoke being generated a lot quicker. You could take the text smoke object here, and you can play around with its settings as well. So this is how much smoke has been, in fact, probably, well, before we do, actually, this is the smoke surface, right? So this is how much smoke is being generated off the surface of this particular text object. This is the volume, these are the temperature differences, the subframe samples, so sampling subframes. Let's have a look. So this should improve the quality when the smoke is moving fast, because we're going to rotate this. Probably what we'll do is pause it, go back to the first frame and set it to like 60 frames. We'll increase the frames afterwards, but it will just be quicker to just test this. running at 60 frames, so when it loops we'll be able to see it a bit quicker. Then it's just a case of playing around with these settings. If you want to see the render a lot quicker, you can click on the smoke domain and just turn off high resolution, and then it will cache everything a lot quicker, but it's going to look a bit blurry. It's not going to be quite clear what's going on. But sometimes you want to do that because you just want to click on the smoke text here, for example, and just play around with these settings to see how that's going to affect the text, right? Or the smoke itself. So now it's just a case of playing around with the settings and see what's going to work for you, and then we can do a test render afterwards. So we'll probably leave most of these settings as they are, and we can always experiment with this afterwards. So we'll click back on the smoke domain. Let's just pause this and we'll set it, we'll leave it at this sort of frame. We'll leave it at 60 frames, and then we can increase the frames afterwards. And we'll turn on high resolution again. We'll go back to the first frame, and what we'll do is we'll go to cache here, and we'll set this to 60 frames, and we're going to bake this smoke effect. When we bake it, basically Blender's creating all of the calculations for this smoke. That's what it's doing. It's keeping a copy of it, so when we do other work, we don't have to keep doing this bake or keep waiting for it to work out the smoke effect. So now when we play, it will play quite fast. It can just loop like this, and then we can play around with some other settings. So let's go to the smoke domain here, and we'll go to the material, and in the volume we can change the color of the smoke, right? You can change it to maybe make it like a blue sort of color, so it kind of matches with our text. But you can set it to whatever color you want, and we can actually change the color during the animation sequence itself, so we can work that out afterwards. We'll leave it at something like blue like this for now, and we're going to go to render, and in the render samples we'll leave it at around 100 for now. We'll turn on bloom, and we'll turn on screen reflections and subsurface scattering. Let's zoom in a little bit here so we can see our text, and we're going to click on the plane. So let's saw the stage here, stage, and we'll go to its material. We need to pause this, right? So click on the stage, go to its material. We can keep this playing, and in theory we should be able to we want to get some reflections here, right, of this text. And maybe what we'll do for now, what we'll do, I think we're going to change this light source. So let's go to the light source here, and we're going to set it to a sun here, and we're going to turn the specular off, and then we can go back to our stage, and in the material we can set the specular now, so that we don't get the shine on the floor, but we'll get the reflection of this text here. So we should really pause this at some point. And then we can play around with the roughness, and that will affect how this text looks. We might want it to be like a little bit blurred out, right? We don't want it to be too sharp, something like this. I think will look good. Okay, so you can play around with these settings. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. And we can see our light sources. Where is our light? Our light's up here. This is the sun, right? Pointing. It's pointing this direction. This is why you don't see. We're going to animate this this sun lamp or the sunlight so that it shines against this text at a certain point during the animation, right? So really, it's worth doing like a little test render now. So if we go to File, Save, in theory, if we go to our render settings here, if we press F12, our camera's not in a very good position, right? So what we can do is just imagine this is what we want the camera to see, or something like on this angle. Let's just say that's what we want the camera to see. Once we're in that position, if we press Ctrl, Alt and 0, the camera will move roughly to that position. Obviously it's slightly off axis. So if we click on this little plus sign or press N on our keyboard, we can do lock camera to view. And when we do that, and we click on the camera up here, we can just use our mouse to drag the camera, and we can use the mouse wheel to zoom out. We can get a nice framed image, something like this. And we'll press F12 again. And now we can see what the text looks like, right? And really what we would do at this point is we'll go to our world settings and set the background to black, total black. And when we render, we won't see any sort of like differences between the background and this floor. So we're getting there. It's probably worth let's just render at this frame. And what we'll do is we'll go back to our render settings, and we're going to open up this bloom settings here. Let's zoom in a little bit. So what we want to do is, once we've set our camera there, we want to turn off 3D lock camera to view, this one. So then when we click outside and zoom in, we won't affect the camera position. And we can close this down, so we can just drag it across. Let's just drag it. We'll probably use these settings afterwards again, so we'll just drag it in. And we want to go to our render view, and then we can just play around with these bloom settings to adjust it. We can just rotate around the object, and our sun will, at the end, the sun's going to really point at the front of this text, so then it will illuminate this text. We can see what that might look like if we go to sort of a front view here, and then if we take the light source, we should be able to just, in fact we'll do that at the end. Let's do that at the end, because we're going to animate that anyway. So what we want to do is, in our volumetrics, we want to tick the shadows, because you can see when you tick shadows, it drops some shadows inside of the smoke, and it will make it look a little bit better. And then the tile sampling, we want to set it to 4. This will help with the render. And the samples we can set to 90, and then the sample shadows we can set those to 90. And then the render samples, we can probably increase them to around 120. Let's just go to the smoke domain, click on the physics, and we've got high resolution already set, so that should be fine. We'll go back to our first frame and we'll free the bake, and then we're going to bake it one more time. Let's get to a frame like this and we'll press F12. This will take a lot longer to render out now because you've changed the settings. It won't take that much longer, but it will take a bit longer to render out. We can see our smoke here. And if, in theory, what we need to do is free the bake here, and the resolution division, if we set that to something like 120, and then go back to the first frame, and then we'll rebake it here, click bake. You can see it's moving a lot slower now, because it's having to do a lot more calculations, but it should help us to get a better smoke effect. So we'll wait for this to bake. We might not bake all frames, maybe we'll bake some of the frames and then we'll pause it or stop it to see what the render looks like. You have to bake first before you can do the render, the test render. So to stop this bake, all we have to do is press the escape key on our keyboard, and then you can see the black line represents the amount of frames it's baked. And if we get to something like here, you see the difference it's made. If we press F12, this will take some time. Now smoke's looking a little bit better. Now it's looking better. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to animate this a bit, right, before we finish. So let's just free the bake, free it, and we're going to go back to our first frame, and we just need to decide what we're going to do. So really, the first thing we want to do is spin this text 360. So we're going to set it to around 120 frames. So let's do the end frame 120, and we need to make sure we set our bake here to 120 frames, like this. And we're going to click on the record button here, and then we're going to click on this text smoke, and we'll go to the frame, let's say around frame 60. In fact, what we need to do is go to the first frame and then press the letter I and insert a location rotation scale. That will put a keyframe here. You can see it's yellow. Then if we go to frame 60, we can do something to this object. So we select the smoke text, because remember that was the parent one, right? That was the one that's going to affect all of the text. So if we go to our object, and then it was on the Z axis, we want to rotate it, rotation on the Z 360. So it's kind of up to you if you want it to rotate this way around or if you want to rotate it this way around. Let's just think about it, right? So this is our text. Do we want it to rotate this way or the other way? I think we'll leave it like this. But if you want it to rotate the other way, all you do is on the Z axis you'll set it to minus 360, right? Minus 360. Then the text will rotate around this direction. Maybe we'll leave it in this direction. Okay. So let's go to File, Save. We'll untick this record button, and what we'll do, let's just sort out the camera, right? So if we click on the camera here, we can see what the camera sees. And we want to go to the first frame here. We'll click on the record button, and we're going to click on the camera here, and we'll press the letter I to insert a location, rotation and scale. And this is the first keyframe for this camera. Then we can click on this little plus sign, and we can click on this camera to view, lock camera to view, click on the camera itself, and then we can drag it across, and we can use the middle mouse wheel to rotate the camera, and we might sort of get it centered like this, right? And we want it to be a bit lower. And sometimes you want to make like adjustments, so you can do them here, right? So this is like the rotation, so we're going to set this to 0, and what we might do, we'll keep this one quite basic, this animation like of the camera. We'll set the Z axis to 0 as well, or Z rotation. So that should be looking pretty straight on. This one's gonna tilt the camera. This is the position, so we want to set the Z axis, this X axis we want to set it to 0. So it's looking quite straight on the logo. And let's see what that looks like from this angle. So we can see some top of the logo. We want to see some of the top. I think that will be fine. And the logo stops animating at frame 60, right? Or stops rotating on frame 60. So on frame 60, we'll press the letter I to insert a location and rotation scale. So then we would basically, our camera won't move at the beginning here. We can make a slight movement to it. So maybe on the first frame, we will, let's see, let's have it maybe move slightly like this. So the camera will move in slightly. And probably it will be an idea to pan it up a little bit, because we're going to have a lot of smoke above, right? Something like this. Let's undo that, Ctrl Z. We want to get to this keyframe here, so make sure you're on keyframe 60, not 59 here. And then we'll move it up to around here. Let's untick the record button here. We'll go back to the first frame and play. In fact, we won't do that. We'll pause it and we'll go back to the first frame. Sometimes when you start to play and it's generating the smoke, it can it won't freeze on you, but it takes a bit of time for it to let's just press escape. Here we go. Okay, so when you start to play it, it's trying to cache the frames for the smoke, and it's hard to stop it, so you need to click the pause button but give it a bit of time for it to stop caching this smoke effect. Now what I find is sometimes it's worth reducing the resolution of the smoke when you just want to do a quick test in the viewport. because if you're trying to get the viewport to render out the smoke in high resolution, it's going to take some time. So what we can do is go to the smoke domain, click here, click on the physics, and set the resolution to a lower value like 60. And we need to change this afterwards, right? So that was originally 90. Or did we set it to 120? We set it to 120. So let's set this to 60. And then turn off the high resolution here temporarily. And then if we click bake frames, you can see it's going to bake them much faster. This is just for testing purposes, so we're only just testing it out to see what it's going to look like. So we've got the frames baked, and when we play, although the smoke doesn't look great, we kind of get an idea what's going to happen with this smoke before we go and bake it in its high resolution. So we pause this and go back to the first frame. And what we want to do is on frame 60, we want this smoke to start fading away, because by the time it gets to frame 120, we want the smoke to disappear and just the logo to show. So if we go to frame 60 here, let's have a look here. Let's go to frame 1 first. Frame 1. We need to free the bake. And we're going to move over this density. Let's just play it. And this density here is going to affect the smoke, right? So we set it to... Let's go back to the first frame. In fact, I don't think we're going to do that. Let's set this back to what it was. Let's see. So that's 0.04. So we'll leave it at 0.04. I think we need to do this on the smoke text here. So if we were to set the... We'll set the surface to 0.5 here. That's just going to make the smoke a bit thinner, right? It won't make it as dense as what it was before. Let's just pause this, because really what we want to try and do here is get this smoke to fade away at the end. So we'll play this. I'm pretty sure, yeah, we can animate this density here. It's set to 1 at the moment. So what we can do is go to the first frame, and we've got the smoke text selected here, and we'll hit the record button, and then we're going to move our mouse over this density and then press the letter I, and that will insert a keyframe for this particular attribute here, density. Then we'll move to frame 60, and we'll go back over to this density and set the letter, press the letter I again, and then that will make sure between these frames here it's set to 1 value. Then we're going to move to the very last frame. In fact, just before the last frame, maybe frame 115. We'll move to density, we'll press the letter I, and that will insert a frame keyframe here, and then we'll set it to 0. So in theory, if we go back to the first frame and play it, we should see smoke being emitted at the beginning. going to need more frames. We're going to need. We've got two options. Either we can reduce the amount of time it takes for the smoke to. Let's have a look. We can go to the smoke domain here and set the dissolve time to a smaller value. So if we set it to something like 2. It still doesn't have enough time for it to fade out. So what we'll do is we'll leave it at 5. We're just going to increase our frames, the number of frames we have. So we've got 120. So that's about 4 seconds. So let's set it to like 160. So we've got more frames now. And if we play, in theory, we should have the smoke fade out at the end. There. That's exactly what we wanted. Okay, so let's see. So at frame 60, it's going to stop rotating, and then our smoke's going to fade out across here. And when there's still a little bit of smoke, let's say around frame 120, we want to go to our light source, this light. We're going to click the record button. So make sure the record is selected. Let's go to, in fact, let's go to the first frame. We'll select the light source and we'll press the letter I. So move into the viewport, press the letter I and insert a location, rotation and scale here for the light source. Then we'll move to frame 120 and press the letter I again. So this will, the light source will be pretty static. We might move it slightly up. But then when we get to frame 160, we're going to adjust this light source. So let's first of all zoom out a little bit here with our mouse wheel, and we'll drop the light source down, bring it down a little bit to around here. And then let's pan around to the side here, and we want to rotate it to point to the text. Just rotating it on the x-axis, right? Like this. So if we untick the record button, go back to the first frame and play it. That's the sort of effects we're going to get. So let's go back to our first frame. And now we need to, I'm quite happy with that for the minute. So let's just go File, Save As, and we'll save it as version 2. Save this, and we want to now make sure all of our smoke settings are correct. So we'll go back to the smoke domain and we'll click on physics here, and let's scroll to the top. Resolution divisions, we want to set it to 120, and then we want to turn back on the high resolution here. Let's just look at our render settings again. We set them to 120 here. Everything else here seems to be fine. If we, in the viewport, if we set the viewport samples to 120 as well, and then if we click on this bloom, we can adjust this a little bit, right? So you can have it quite, obviously not that strong, but you can adjust this bloom, and this is like the shine effect that you're going to have. You can turn it completely off, or you can adjust it slightly. Depends on how much you want, right? So if you set it to something like this, you can play around with these settings to see how much of this light effect that you want, and you can change its radius. I think something like this looks pretty good. Okay, so we'll click on the camera, so we see what the camera, let's click on the camera, let's see what the camera sees. We'll click on our select box tool, and let's just make sure we've got resolutions 120 and we've got high resolution ticked off. We can probably set this to 2. Here, you don't want to set it to too high a number, it's quite CPU intensive. Let's save this, and we're going to render. We're going to need to bake our frames now, right? So this is the bit that takes a bit of time. So this is the time to go and have a cup of tea, and we'll click bake, and you can see it's done like 1%, 2%. So this really does take some time, but if we set our settings quite high, it's going to take a fair amount of time to bake all of this dynamics of our smoke, but the end result will look much better. We spent more time baking the settings here. So we need to leave this. I'm going to pause the video, and then we'll come back once this is all baked. So it's going to take probably about 5 or 10 minutes to do that. Okay, so the frames are finished baking. You can see that it did 120 frames. I made a bit of a mistake here. It did 120 frames, but we increased it to 160, if you remember. So I think don't think there's a way to fix this. We have to just rebake it. So we're gonna have to free the bake and set it to 160. So if you made that mistake, I do apologize. We have to rebake it basically. I'm pretty sure there must be a way to like I think we just have to rebake it, unfortunately. So I'm going to click bake again here. It says current cache to bake. Bake from current cache. So if we click this one, it's not going to work. So we have to free the bake and rebake it all again, unfortunately. So let's do that again. So that will take some time to rebake again. If you've baked it once to 120 frames and then you have to rebake it to 160, I apologize. Sometimes we make mistakes. So let's just rebake it to 460 frames. And I'll pause this video again and we'll come back and see the 460 frame bake. Okay, so Blender's finished baking off the frames for this smoke effect, and if we go back to the first frame, we can just play it. Depending on your computer, it might be a bit jerky, but get a basic play out of it and see what it looks like. So here we can see the smoke being generated from that text that we put in the center, and then it will get to the last frame here and it will start to rise, and then it will fade out. Then our text should get illuminated, right, with the light source, like this. So what we need to do is maybe do a test render. So you can pick any frame you want, something like this, and then we can press F12. So move to the frame. I'm moving to frame 56. When I'm on that frame, I can press F12, and it'll take a few seconds. It's taking around, you can see here, probably around 10 seconds to render this frame, or 6 seconds. We can see roughly what the smoke looks like and the render here. So really what I would do at this point is do a test video render, just a basic one. So we can go to our output settings here, and in output I want to reduce the frame size down to around 30. Normally we wouldn't do this when we're rendering out our final video clip. But I just want to do a quick test render to see what it looks like, and if I'm happy with it, then I can put the energy in to render out the main frames to make the last video. So we'll render this out. We'll probably do not all the frames. We'll do up to like we can check here, right? So probably up to about frame 80 should be okay, because the rest of it is just really smoke rising and fading. Well, let's do up to frame 90. That's where our rotation ends, right? So we'll do from start frame to frame 90, rather than rendering out all the frames. And instead of PNG, we're going to select AVI RAW, and we need to give it a folder location. So we'll go to our desktop, go into here, and we're just going to render it out on this root directory. We'll click RGB here, and we'll just go to the first frame and press Ctrl and then F12. And we're going to render out like a smaller version of this video clip, just to see what it looks like. Because if you're going to render out all the frames in high resolution, like full 1080p, it's worth rendering them out as a small example, just to see what the video will look like as a basic small resolution example, and then you can work out whether it's looking good or not, if there's any problems with it, or if you're happy with it, or if you want to change anything. So it's worth doing the smaller version, checking it, and then you can make adjustments if you're not happy with it. So I'll let this render out. I'll pause it quickly. Just going to render out all of those 90 frames, and then we'll check it afterwards to see what it looks like. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering out that video clip. It did the full 90 frames. You can see 90 frames here. So if we close this, and we can just check out that little basic mini video clip to see what it looks like. So here we've got this animation sequence here. If we open it, it's going to be in low resolution, so we need to really resize this to its native resolution here. We can see what the smoke looks like, right? And we can decide, are we happy with that, the way it looks? I think it's okay. It's not exactly the same as the demo one I did create on for my YouTube channel, but I think it looks okay. We could add some more dynamics going on here. So as the smoke swirled around, maybe the smoke could have got pushed off to the side. So I reckon I'm going to render this one out in its full frames, and then we'll make a second version of this. I'll make a separate tutorial and we'll tweak this smoke to give it a bit more dynamic element to it. Because right now, it looks okay, I guess, but you can see like this repetition here. Can you see? It just looks like it's repeating, and that makes it look a bit, doesn't make it look amazing, right? So but we can sort that out. We'll look at that and see what we're going to do. We'll play around with the settings afterwards, and we'll see. But it's not too bad, right? It looks okay. It's quite cool. So what we'll do is close this. We don't need to keep this video, but we'll keep it there for now. We'll close this, and we'll go back to Blender, and this time we're going to set it to the full 160 frames. So we'll set it to 160 frames, and we'll set our resolution all the way back up to 100. We'll make sure we're on the first frame here, and the frame rate doesn't matter at the moment, but what we would do is select it's up to you, depends on how you're going to edit this video, if you're going to use it on YouTube channel or whatever you're going to do. But normally I just set it to 30 frames here, but we won't be exporting a video. We're going to export single frames, and then we'll composite the video afterwards, because then we can do other work to those frames rather than having it as a video clip. We'll have them as separate PNG files, and then we'll use Blender afterwards to composite that video. So what we'll do for now is, instead of AVI RAW, we're going to select PNG, and we're going to click on this folder, and we're back into our root directory. So on our desktop in this folder here, and we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this frames here, new folder. We'll click on that, and we're going to save all of our 160 frames in here. So we'll click accept, and we'll set it to 16 color depth here. And I think that's pretty much all we need to do. Let's just double check. Resolution is fine. It's 1080p resolution. Got 100% of the frame, so it'll be the full frame. The aspect ratio, all of this is good. We're going to start on the first frame and end on this frame, and we're going to do one step, so we're not going to skip any frames. 30 frames a second is not relevant at the minute. This I don't know what it is, so we'll have to work that out at another date. Let's just make sure this is all okay. PNG 16-bit, this is all good. we do have an opportunity to like increase the sample rates and increase the sample rates here and also on the shadows, but I think these settings should be fine. We could set the tile sample to 2. That will take longer to render, so I'm going to leave it at 4, but if we set it to 2 it would actually improve the render, but we'll leave it at 4 because it's going to take quite a bit of time for this to render out anyway. So to start rendering out the frames, we'll click on output here. You don't have to, but we'll click on output. Let's just go to file, save as, and we'll save it as version 3. And we're going to press Ctrl and then F12. Ctrl, F12. It's going to start to render the first frame. Now this will take some time, so you've got to be patient. This is the time to go and have a cup of tea, go and do something else, because this is probably going to take a good half an hour, maybe a little bit less, I don't know. It's 160 frames and it's doing it at around 7 seconds a frame, but that depends on how much smoke is being generated and stuff like that, so this will take some time. Let's just make sure we can see some smoke being generated, because the last thing we want to do is render all the frames, come back and you don't see any smoke in your video clip. That's happened to me before, so it's worth watching a few frames, make sure we see some smoke being emitted to make sure that we're getting our smoke effect in here, right? It doesn't look like I'm seeing any smoke, so let's just see a few more frames. Right, we're not seeing no smoke, so let's stop this. Let's close it. And probably what's happened here is I've saved it as version 3, right? So when I saved it as version 3, that caused a little bit of a problem. So if we go to our folder, we'll see that there's a cache for the text 2, right? This version. But there's no cache for this version, so we can either recache it all, which is a waste of energy and time, or we can just open up version 2 and render that one, because this version 2 and 3 are basically the same, yeah? We just saved it as another version, so we could almost call version 3 as our backup. So let's just go to file, open, recent, and we do version 2 here, because version 2 has all the bake settings for the smoke. So if we go back to our render view here, we can see our smoke here, right? When we saved it as version 3, we didn't have all the bake settings done, so we have to rebake it all, and it doesn't make sense because we're not changing anything. So we might as well just open up version 2 and let's call version 3 the one that we're going to tweak maybe later or do something to it to change the smoke effect. Maybe I'll make a slightly second version of this tutorial, but there's no way we want to rebake all of this. That's just a waste of time. So let's just go back to the first frame. What we'll do is just open up this folder, and in frames we can see the frames here. Now the frames were okay, but they didn't have any smoke effect, so if you didn't want the smoke effect, you was good to go really. You can just have this bloom effect, but that's not what we want, so we'll select all of these frames and delete them. And this is why it's worth checking sometimes, right? If you make a mistake, imagine if we rendered out all 160 frames, come back after we've had our cup of tea, and to find out that we don't have any smoke in our frames. That would be like a half an hour of time wasted basically. We could have used that work anyway, but that's not the objective, right? So let's just click the play button. Let's make sure we see some smoke. Let's go to the first frame. There's like a backwards play and a forwards play here, so click the forward one. We can see our smoke, so we know we're good to go. We'll go back to the first frame. Let's go back to the output, and everything in here is still the same as it was, right? So we just need to click on this temporary directory, click here, and we'll go back to desktop, and we'll go to the folder, and we'll click frames folder here. So we want to save our frames in here, click accept, and then PNG. We don't need an alpha channel really, so we can just click RGB. Is it worth having an alpha channel? I don't think we need one, right? Alpha channel is transparency, but we've got no transparency in here anyway. We'll click 16. Bit color depth. I think that's just going to improve the color. I think that'll make it look better. And I'm a bit paranoid, so let's just check everything in here is good. Normally what it's worth doing is going to, just to double check, go to like a frame where there's a lot of smoke like this and just press F12 on its own, and let's just render out this one frame. It'll take about 5-6 seconds to do, and then we can see the smoke's in there, so that should be fine, right? So let's go back to our first frame. We'll right click here, drag across to our first frame, 160. We're exporting as a PNG file. This is all set up, so we'll press Ctrl F12 and we'll re-render those first set of frames, and we're going to do the whole all 160 frames. Let's just check again, give Blender a little bit of time to render out a few frames. Let's make sure we see some smoke. Yeah, we can see the smoke starting to appear on the text. We'll let it do a few frames and I'm going to go make a cup of tea. Yep, it's all coming out, so that's all good. Okay, we'll leave this to render. I'm going to pause the video, and it's probably going to take, let's see, we've got 160 frames and it's doing it at around 7, let's call it around 8 seconds, right? So 160 times 8 divided by 60 will give us 21 minutes to render, just over 21 minutes or a little bit less. So I'm going to come back in 20 minutes and we should have all our frames, then we're going to make the video clip. Okay, so that took quite some time and Blender's finished rendering out all of the 160 frames. I can see a few problems in here on the final render. Obviously the text like this, it's at an angle like this reflection, and it's not really showing all of it. It's not faded out smoothly. So I think I'm going to make a second version of this tutorial and we'll fix things like that, and I'll show you how to do some other things like change the color of the smoke and get some more dynamics in the smoke. But as a basic example of this tutorial, I think it will suffice for now. It'll be fine. So we'll fix some things in the next version of this tutorial. We'll actually continue with this same tutorial in a second part, and we'll improve this animation afterwards, right? So let's close this and we'll minimize this for a second, and if we go into our folder and we see the frames, we can see all of the frames that have been rendered. And we'll just check that we can see all of the, it's worth checking in here to see that there's no like black frames or any problems. Blender did a pretty good job here, so that's fine. And now we want to make this into a video sequence. So we'll go back to Blender. Let's just go to File, Save, and then we're going to click on this viewport option here. We're going to change it to a video sequencer here. So now we're inside the video sequencer. We're going to go to Add and Image Sequence. I'm going to go to the frames and we'll select all of the frames. So make sure you select all 160 frames here, and we'll click Add Film Strip or Add Image Strip, and then we'll see the images here. And if you want to quickly preview it, click Sequencer and Preview here, and then you can scrub through the frames and you can see your sort of animation going on here. So let's just go back to the first frame. We'll render this out as a video clip now quickly. So we'll set it to 30 frames. I'm going to set mine to 30. You can leave it at 24 frames or whichever frame rate you like. I'll normally just use 30 frames because when I upload my videos to YouTube, they're at 30 frames a second. And instead of PNG, we're going to select AVI RAW here, and we're going to go to this folder and we're just going to render out the video clip. We can render it in this frames folder, that's fine. We just render it out here. So we just click Accept, and all of these other settings we're just going to leave them as they are, but this time we're going to make the video clip. So we're going to press Ctrl and F12, and this will render out as a quick video clip. It's just taking all the frames and making a video sequence out of it. So I'm going to pause this and come back to it once it's finished. Okay, so Blender's finished compositing the video. It's taken all 160 frames and made a video clip. So we can close this. We'll go back to this option here and select 3D viewport, and we'll go to File and we'll go to Save. Let's just save this. We can close down Blender now, and if we open up our folder and go into the frames folder, we'll see that there's a video clip here. We can open that up and we can see our smoke text animation. And if we open this in Windows Media Player and then we click here and select repeat, we can just see it loop a few times. There's definitely a few things I would have fixed in here, right? So if we pause it, I think the beginning is it's okay, right? You can see the logo is here, or the text is here. This is pretty good position for it to be. And then as it spins around, it gets pretty close, like this smoke is getting pretty close to the bottom here. Well, actually the bottom's really here, right? So this is actually okay at the moment. But on the end frames here, I think it came out okay. No, can you see it's getting cut off here? Like if I let go, let's just move the mouse off the screen. On that last frame here, this fade is getting cut right here. You can see that here, right? There's like a line right across the bottom, and it's going at an angle as well. It's not the best. So we could have moved this text up a bit and had a better sort of this effect at the bottom here would have looked a lot better. But as a general example, you now know how to create the text, how to implement the 3D, well, how to spin this text in this 3D environment, how to create the domain for the smoke. So the domain had enough space behind it and around the sides and the top for the smoke to flow out, how to position the camera and animate the camera, how to animate this light sequence at the end. And we're pretty much done with this particular tutorial. So I think we can improve this. So normally I would just leave this tutorial here, but I think we can improve it, and I can show you a few more things, how to make this smoke a bit more dynamic. It's a bit one-dimensional in terms of this spinning. It looks pretty good though, don't get me wrong, but I think we can improve that. So I'm going to make a second version to continue this tutorial, and we'll try and improve this to see how we can make it better. So let's try and do that in the next video. For now I'm going to end this video, so let's just close this, and we'll close this down. And I hope you found this tutorial useful, and if you manage to create a spinning text with this smoke animation, it would be good if you can share your example. If you upload it to YouTube, if you can share it in the description, I would like to see that, to see what yours looks like. And in the next tutorial we'll try and improve this. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP web tutorial.